Over to you, and Laura can start the recording.
Well, thank you, Owen, and thanks for your introduction. Much appreciated. Well, when you speak to someone online for a year and a half, and then you actually meet them in person, I think particularly maybe just for Owen, but they seem smaller in person. Now I was expecting Owen to be there, and actually Owen turned out to be there. But there we go. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, and actually thanks for the invite today. It's like it's a real pleasure and an honour to be asked to present to you as well. So kind of a bit of a plan then for the presentation. I'm going to offer the idea is kind of offer a bit of a talent perspective. So the whole conference is kind of focused on coaching environments and that sort of thing. So hopefully I'm going to offer kind of a bit of a talent perspective to that today. And we'll start off with we're going to narrow ourselves down. So we're going to try and position ourselves, and we'll narrow ourselves down, put ourselves in kind of our system, and then get to kind of conversations about environments. And hopefully by the end, we'll get a bit of an idea of what makes up a good environment, at least some kind of, maybe just some discussion points and what the features are of good environments. And then we'll get on to have a bit of a chat about kind of the iCoach Kids Plus research that I've worked on as well. And then we'll kind of hopefully bring it all together with some points at the end. So, but before we get going on any content, I'm going to start off with this. Okay, so a confession from me and a wish for you all as well. Okay, so I know Owen, you were quite interested in what I was going to say with this. Okay, so I want this presentation to be as practically useful for you. Okay, and I'm coming from absolutely from a research perspective. Okay, so for me, data is knowledge, and data is really, really useful, and it provides us with some information of what's been done, what works, what's good, and that sort of thing. Okay, so that's my kind of upfront, is that I'm coming from this. And throughout, hopefully I can kind of give lots of practical stuff like which comes from that, and also actually from my own experiences of working within talent and coaching kind of county level hockey as well, which I'm doing at the moment, which is kind of really interesting for me as well. And hopefully I can bring that out a little bit. So the confession is that for me, I'm no expert on Gaelic games, right? So I don't have the detailed knowledge that all of you do as coaches about the intricacies of your sport. Okay, and the details and the knowledge you have of your environments as well. So for me, you're the absolute experts of your environments. You're the ones that work with your kids, and you're there day to day in training of them. Okay, and that is an absolute huge asset to yourselves. So what I kind of want to put forward in that sense is that, like, throughout this presentation, when I'm going through these different points and we're talking about what makes a good environment and that sort of thing, like, I'm coming in from a general perspective. So what the research has told us is kind of good across sports and across different settings and that sort of thing. Okay, so I want you to try and ask yourselves, like, what is your reality, and then okay, so what's this mean practically for you in your case? So the sort of thing is, like, how does that look for me? If I was to take that idea down and apply it, would that work? Does that fit what we've got at my club at the moment? Okay, because some things won't necessarily work and some things won't fit and make sense. Okay, but some things might. And it's just about applying your lens of your coach, okay, the bit kind of like gatekeeper sort of thing, like, oh, that's actually quite useful. So, like, the point is to absolutely apply your context much from it as you can, and hopefully actually taking the general perspective, you can kind of see some principles that work across a whole range of different areas as well, and that might be quite interesting. So at the end, hopefully, I'm going to ask all of you, okay, by the end of the session, I'll ask you to put something in the chat, okay? That could be literally one word, one statement, or one idea that you might get from this presentation, actually thinking about to your context of coaches, okay? That you've got as a practical tip, okay? A tip or a bit of nugget of knowledge or anything that you've got from this presentation you've thought about in your context, okay, that might make sense and might be useful to share. So hopefully at the end of the chat, we might get 10, 15 sort of ideas from different kind of Gaelic sport coaches, football, hurling, whatever it might be, of actually, oh, so with long-term development, in my context, we do this, for example, okay? So that's a bit of my confession and a wish, okay? So hopefully you help me with my wish out throughout the presentation. But we'll crack on, okay? We'll crack on with some content. And what we're going to try and do, as I say, we're going to start from like our broad perspective, okay? So, and that, thinking about getting onto the environments, but where talent development generally, and where environments kind of sit within a talent system. So useful for us to think and talk and like position ourselves within our systems. Okay, so our system in a talent setting is generally what we talk about as the structures in place to support athletes to progress to the next level. And the biggest, broadest sense, the social, physical, tangible, intangible kind of processes, structures, whatever it might be, that are essentially getting our athletes from A to the B and getting them up that ladder of kind of performance. Okay, and it generally works. And this is kind of a general generic model, okay? Kind of works from this this model on the left, right? We're copying Cook model, which is really famous, really popular model, okay? Which is we start with our normative population, okay? And sometimes it kind of works in a pyramid sense. The UK sport is kind of based in a pyramid sense model, which is most sports really, most systems anyway, sorry. Which is we take our normative population, okay? Some of them get selected or identified in one way, okay? And then we get our smaller group that get selected, okay? They do some talent development and some training, and we select a group, we select a group, select a group, select a group. Okay, we have this kind of like linear pathway. Okay, and what that kind of looks like for players sometimes, and as a coach in the system on that pathway, that journey can kind of seem, at least for me as a coach, when I'm coaching the kind of under 50 West Yorkshire boys, which I do every kind of week or so. Okay, so then that's kind of like, oh, that journey starts at the top, and that could be my pathway. Okay, and it's, I guess, relatively linear and relatively clean in that sense. It kind of that model looks kind of like quite simple, doesn't it? I guess to some extent, at least looks like a clear pathway. And in reality, there we go. In reality, our systems are a lot more like this, okay? A lot more messy, and there's a lot more going on. There's a lot more barriers. There's a lot more things that actually affect our athletes, okay? And the point is they're pretty complex, okay? And it'll get to the point, actually, we'll talk about things we can kind of actually end up controlling, really. And this model here isn't for us to really like necessarily take in. I'm not going to talk about what's on here, okay? This is just simply as an explanation of kind of the things that go on when people are involved in talent. Okay, so this is just a model that basically shows some of the potential predictors of adult high performance in soccer. Okay, so in football, some of the things that might predict whether a player goes on to play the highest level. Okay, the point being, right, is that it's super wide ranging and super complex. Like we've got 8 areas. Okay, we've got 8 areas in here, and we've got maybe 5, 6 different points. So here, and this is just some of them. Okay, this is just some of the points that might affect where an athlete goes on to be successful. Is it? We've probably got 50, maybe 50 areas on this table here that kind of suggested that matter. And some of these are even chance factors, essentially no control. Okay, the point being, it's wide ranging and really complex. Okay, so there's a lot going on. So we're going to leave that point there into a little bit of a video from Kev Till. And there's, I guess, 2 things for this. Firstly is I'll do some sort of shameless plug now and say this is the sort of kind of video that we have of I Coach Kids. If you're familiar with kind of what Owen's work as well, we basically create a lot of online content, and we work with coaches on more of it, like delivering this sort of stuff. So we've got a whole like YouTube channel and video and website and this sort of thing. Okay, so it's a bit of a shameless plug. First up, this is the sort of kind of video we have, and actually I was going to go into some kind of the principles of what kind of the most common talked about principles in TID and development and that sort of thing. And I thought actually Kev Till is one of my PhD supervisors and works at Leeds Beckett as well. There's no one better in the world, to be completely honest, to try and explain some of these things. And the point is, right, is that Kev will talk about them and he'll make them sound really easy to understand. And some of these things here sound really complicated. And actually, sometimes we break them down, we think about them in a practical sense, and they're actually useful for us to think about, and they're a bit more simple. So we're gonna have a bit of a watch this video. Again, we're still thinking about how does this make sense in my context? Is that a takeaway I can apply? How does that look like with my group I'm working with at the moment? All right, we'll have a watch this video and we'll keep
Hey coach, welcome back. The previous videos summarised how children grow and develop in 4 key areas: social, physical, emotional and cognitive, otherwise known as the SPEC model. This video will look at the implications of how children grow for talent identification and development. Talent identification and development systems have become popular in recent years. These systems aim to help find and nurture young athletes into the sporting superstars of tomorrow. Talent identification is the process of finding individuals with potential at an earlier age to become elite performers in the future. This often involves coaches and scouts observing sporting performance to decide on a player's potential. Talent development systems provide athletes with a suitable learning environment to accelerate and fulfill their potential. This learning environment is often supported by higher quality coaching, enhanced training and competition, and other support services like strength and conditioning and medical support. Different sports and countries run different talent identification and development programs. In some sports, these can start within children from 7 years of age. Yes, that's right, 7 years of age. However, as children grow, this can make talent identification and development challenging. Here are 3 key challenges for talent identification within young athletes that you should be aware of. Challenge 1. Predicting potential at an early age is very difficult. Talent identification ultimately involves trying to predict the future. The further away an individual is from adulthood, the less accurate a talent identification decision can be. Trying to predict potential within child when we consider a child's growth. As discussed in the previous 4 videos, children grow socially, physically, emotionally, and cognitively. As these types of growth all occur at different times, this makes talent identification decisions even more difficult. Growth and development at certain time points can influence sporting performance and how talent is perceived. In a way, all that glitters is not gold, and some gold may be hidden until full growth is achieved. Lastly, talent identification should focus on predicting potential. Assessing future potential against current performance is difficult. What does potential look like? As you can see on the screen, Joseph Baker and colleagues presented a 3x3-way matrix of performance versus potential to help coaches classify athletes as high-performing, high potential in box number 9 to low-performing, low potential in box number 1. Overall, talent identification is very much about thinking about the future. So get out your crystal balls. Okay, so over to challenge 2. Early identification equals early specialization. Talent identification within sports can occur at early ages. For example, within gymnastics, this can occur between 6 to 9 years and 7 to 8 years in soccer. These early talent identification processes may promote early sport specialization, which includes intensive within a single sport. Early specialization may enhance sport-specific performance in the short term. However, it has recently been hotly debated on the benefits of this approach compared to youth athletes sampling a wide range of sports. Research shows that those who play multiple sports while growing up have a stronger chance of becoming top athletes. The International Olympic Committee has raised awareness of some potential negative outcomes of early specialization. These negative outcomes include injury, overtraining, and negative psychosocial health, such as burnout. Therefore, although early talent identification may have some benefits to sports, in the interest of the health and well-being of young athletes, coaches should consider the potential negative impact of such early talent identification programs before deciding this is the way to go. And finally, challenge 3. Young athletes are grouped into age groups. Athletes within most sports like education, are grouped into annual age categories. For example, in the United Kingdom, we use the 1st of September to the 31st of August as the selection start and cut-off dates, which coincide with the school year. This process is designed to provide equal competition and developmental opportunities for young athletes. From a talent identification perspective, this process should allow equal opportunities for athletes to be identified. However, this fails to consider the chronological age differences between individuals within an annual age category, otherwise known as relative age. For example, if we consider two children, one born on the 1st of September and the other born on the 31st of August, there is a 364-day difference in age, but they will play in the same age group. These differences have resulted in what is known as the relative age effect. The relative age effect is the short-term and long-term participation and development consequences resulting from these differences in age. Ultimately, young athletes can be advantaged or disadvantaged within talent identification and youth sport based upon their birth date and the dates used to create annual age groups. The relative age effect is very common across children's sport and talent identification programs. See the graph here, which shows relative age effects in UK Rugby League's talent identification system. 55% of players selected into their national programme at 13 to 15 years were born between September and November. These relative age advantages or disadvantages are a result of the likely enhanced growth of relatively older individuals. The advantages may not only be physical, but also cognitive, social, and emotional. Remember the SPEC model. To summarize, it is vital coaches understand how children grow and develop and the impact this has on the need for and impact of talent identification and development systems. Now it's time for you to think about how this plays out in your coaching context. Please move on to the reflect.
All right, we'll leave that there then. So hopefully you've kind of got a bit of a flavour, an overview of kind of some of the topics and debates that are really prevalent in talent identification, a lot in that case, and in development kind of in systems generally. Okay, and if there's plenty of videos like that, actually you can see the sorts of the videos that we have as well. So please do go check out some of the different content that we've got as well. There's some more stuff on talent development out there as well. But there's kind of a lot in there that is, there's so many things we can't control, right? And actually it's really hard to predict talent. What can we do as coaches then? So what can we do on the ground working day to day in our talent settings to actually help then? Like, what can we do? And we'll get onto that. Okay, before we get into some of the more details, it's a bit of a question of, okay, let's ask yourself, where are we then? Okay, so what is your talent pathway and where are you on it? So for me, I work kind of coach hockey in England. Okay, so for me, I kind of work within the England hockey pathway. Okay, and this is the new model that is being rolled out at the moment. So for me, I kind of coach in developing hockey at my club. Again, I coach some adult hockey in the sustaining competitive hockey bit, and the main bit is in talent foundation for me. So I work with the under 15s in West Yorkshire, which is a county squad, and I do some other county stuff as well. So I work in the talent foundation section. Okay, so the question is for you guys, in your example here, right? So I think the general theme is that most of you're from kind of Gaelic Games perspective, okay, and that's the Gaelic Games player pathway, all right? So where are you on this pathway? And that's really important for us to actually be really clear on. Okay, super clear. So for me on this pathway, I'm thinking when I'm coaching the county lot, okay, so they're coming from developing hockey. So what are the characteristics and what have they gone through at that stages of their kind of their journey, that river? Okay, where are they at on that and where are they going? Okay, so what are the differences and what are those jumps as well? Okay, and actually it's really relevant even if we're not directly coaching in our talent stage, it might be kind of our T1 to T4, is that how that looks when we're coaching an F3, for example, is really important. So we have some sort of idea for our athletes to go into those next stages. That might be kind of a little bit about into kind of a talent, more talent space. Okay. And we'll get on to what talent might look like a little bit in a moment. But it's really useful for us to also think about our systems in different stages as well. And this is a really common way at looking at it and kind of mapping it out a little bit as well. And this will direct us towards to development a bit as well. So kind of systems will kind of have these different stages to them. Generally speaking, it might look different in different systems. Kev talked about that a second ago, that actually, you know, sports and countries have different systems that look in different ways and have different pathways. So that's the England hockey one that I put up there, and actually the Gaelic game ones looks really different to that, right? But generally speaking, all systems have this sort of structure to them. At the very least, they'll have this cyclical bit in the middle, okay, which is feeding itself. Okay, and these stages kind of start with some sort of feed in, which would be maybe detection. Okay, so detection, the discovery of potential performers who are not currently involved in the sport or question. So that's kind of the initial idea, in a sense, that players are kind of pin marked in some way to be, okay, there's potential for them to be high performing in some sense. And that goes to kind of identification. So a bit more of a firm recognition that these players have some sort of potential to be what it takes to be elite performer in the future. And then we kind of get to, which hopefully I'm going to drum in now, the kind of moving wheel of our system, which is the development stage. And that's essentially providing those players that may have been kind of positioned as particularly kind of with high potential or some sense of potential, giving them the opportunity to get better, basically. Okay, accelerating performance, realize their potential. And then players from that might be selected in some way to represent, play, and kind of use their skills in one way or another. And then in some cases, players might transfer out of our system to play another sport if they've got some particular skills, maybe that have been shown to be very useful in other sports. And there's been some quite successful, well-known and big media presence kind of transfers from athletics to kind of like bobsleigh and Winter Olympic sports like that, for example. But if we look at this system here and we look at kind of the moving parts of it, the only time where our athletes are really working, they're engaging in something practical and they're spending time, it's the development stage. Okay, so a lot of talent identification discussions generally talk about ID and talk about the different things. In kind of our world of talent, the buzz topics, the conversations are often really about like relative age effect and all these different things that are really common discussions and are absolutely really important. But if you look at the different stages that we said that most systems are made up of, the bit of the bit where athletes are actually doing stuff, and actually where coaches are working with athletes, so we can make a difference as coaches, is the development stage. Really, that's the moving part. That's the wheel of our system. That's what keeps everything going round. Okay, so that's where we're making our difference. Okay, so that's kind of like the heart. We should think that's the heart of our system is the development bit, what we can do, where we're working with athletes. Okay, and that might mean different things, but generally kind of thinking about basically providing them that environment to realize their potential. Okay, so this is a bit of a definition for us maybe just to cling on to. Talent development generally refers to the multifaceted process
My film service isn't available right now.
My Google HomePod. Oh, no, not my Apple HomePod, going mental. Anyway, so talent development refers to the multifaceted process of optimally nurturing athletes over time who presently may or may not be identified as talented within our sports system. Okay, because sometimes they, in our wide talent development kind of thing, they might be identified during that stage. And it's a bit of a balance between matching our environment to our athletes, okay, and actually providing an environment we know is suitable to develop our athletes as well, considering things like profile of the athletes, development status, and dual career as well. Okay, and then let's layer this with our context then. So let's layer this context for maybe the most of us on this call then. So for you, the talent development stage, talent development is in in the kind of the F10 model which we use. In the F10 section, in the F10 model, it's kind of T1 to T3, right? And particularly what we've got. There we go. What we've particularly got maybe is our talent development stage isn't really in T3. That's maybe where we've got some stability in the environment we can create. So perhaps real time where athletes can get down and refine their kind of talent really. And of course, we know that talent development takes a long time, and we'll get onto that. So we've got to think more than just that period. Okay, we've got to think across those experiences and those environments they're in, kind of from looking towards maybe 13 and plus really, which is, I know that's up for debate in itself, but kind of looking towards narrowing a focus on talent around those age sections really. But particularly in this model, it might be around the practicing and achieving stage where we've got some stability in maybe the group thought, and for us to create an environment. Talking, that might look like generally for talent, an increase, and comparing it to kind of more grassroots, that kind of foundational level, increase in training, okay, increase in training load, an increase in intensity and expectations we're asking from athletes, and then a general kind of use and prevalence of competition as well. That's the kind of practical things you might start to see in a talent development stage. So we've talked about now, hopefully I'm making it pretty clear, I'm drumming into that the development stage is key for us, okay? Well, we think about what development is. It's for athletes, it's engaging in the whole process. So for them, it's where they are in the environment, okay, what they can see and what they're engaging in. So the environment is the absolute heart. And if there's anything I can get away from, you can get away from today's session, the environment that we can create is the beating heart of our talent system, the beating heart of our talent system. And that's because generally, we think about that whole thing, is the most consistent and immediately controllable area of our talent system, okay? The most controllable factor in the life of a developing athlete, okay? So in that sense, TDEs, we go back to that model, they essentially drive the whole TID process, that environment, okay? That environment drives the whole TID process. A quick side note, at the beginning of the presentation, I put all those random pictures up, the heart, the steering wheel, the sandwich, and all those bits, okay? They were totally random at the start. But the idea is, hopefully, throughout the presentation, the random context of those pictures start to make a little bit of sense, okay? So there's 2 pictures in here, all right? So the idea is, beating heart of our system, okay, is our environment, what we control as coaches, okay? And that environment essentially drives the process. Okay, so there's definitely a point here to think about, okay, take a step back. What is our environment? What is it? So I've kind of generally alluded to it, to kind of the learning environment. Okay, it's a social, physical, psychological space that athletes are engaging in the talent development process. Okay, in a practical sense, then that might look like kind of the athlete's immediate surroundings. And the way I like to make sense of that is if I was looking through the back of my player's eyes, okay, when they're doing their talent development, okay, when they're going to sessions, and I'm looking through the back of their eyes and looking at what they see, okay, if I had a webcam on their head, okay, what are all those different things then? Okay, what are all the different things that they're going through? And then it's an interaction between all those areas of their environment, okay? That's really important that those things interact. And we might see the clubhouse, okay? We might see pictures on the wall of the clubhouse. We might see people in the clubhouse. We might see parents. We might see other players. We might see our coaches. And then we've got our pitch, okay? That's just the tangible physical things we can see. Then we've got the interaction, the social culture. We've got all these different things, okay? And they relate in. We also have to think about a slightly wider context of just that immediate surrounding, okay? So the things that the athlete just see, but the things that affect that immediate environment as well. So things like culture, okay? And maybe kind of the structures of our sporting structure and that sort of thing. And then we've got an organizational culture that might be that thread that runs through it. And one way to help make sense of what our environment might be and the things that we might be able to therefore control, okay, is this is a really so that model here. So this work here is from Christopher Henriksen, who's a really big researcher who's produced some great work on talent development environments. And this is kind of the model that they use to map out their environment, okay? And we can use in a really practical sense as well, okay? So this might be, and there's quite a lot going on, these might be the things that might affect our athletes, okay? And this is a practical tool for us, okay? So a bit of a takeaway, something we can do ourselves. So what I would maybe actually say to you, let's map out our environment and see what are the boundaries of our environment. What are the things that affect our environment and maybe don't affect them so much. Okay, and we can map this out. Okay, my artistic skills are pretty dire. Okay, but I had a quick go this morning to map out my environment with my team. Okay, my county under 15s. And I tell you, my artistic skills are terrible because I went through a number of drafts, okay, before I got to this. And hopefully the screen will allow me to show this just about, okay. It looks terrible, okay, but what I've done is I've tried to recreate this bit of this model and map it out for me. So I've got my county under 15s in the middle, okay, and I've got me and the assistant coaches I work with, okay. I'll hold it there just so I can see it. Okay, and then things that more or less might affect my environment. Okay, so the things that are immediately close are me and the coaches, the micro environment. Okay, and then I've got their parents as well. Those are things that probably for me are immediately affecting my players. And actually in our county setting, so in this model here, we've got current elite athletes and younger athletes, okay, in their setting, okay. But for me, in our England hockey setting, actually, our county players don't really interact with each other. So they're a little bit further afield, and that's perhaps a little bit of a limitation for me, is that our athletes don't get to mix with higher athletes, for example. They don't get to interact with those athletes. They're quite distant, okay? And you can see kind of the arrows showing that relationship a little bit as well, is that the parents and the players don't get much information about the England hockey talent system. Most of that comes through me here, because I'm working to try and understand the wider England hockey talent system here, okay? So that's coming to me and I'm feeding that back in and putting that into my planning, okay? But really useful stuff to even map out these different things that affect our environment, and maybe quite a good little practice to go through. Okay, so hopefully now time for us to get a little bit engaged, and I'm going to ask something from you now, okay? And hopefully you've got some sort of ideas. Again, it might be a word, it might be 2 words, it might be a sentence, okay? So for those on the call, a question for you, okay? Whether you are working talent or not, okay? A question for you. What makes a talent development environment successful? Okay, so what do we, as coaches, what do we judge ourselves as successful? What do we want our athletes to achieve, and what are our markers? Okay, what are the things that we know, that we see, that we know we've done successful? Okay, so can we do this for like 30 seconds, put them in the chat, okay? Just throw some ideas in what that might be, okay? Throw some ideas in, and then I'm going to offer kind of 2 perspectives, okay? So 30 seconds now. If you could just have a crack, put a few ideas in, see what you think, have a look. And then I'm going to kind of go on and offer basically 2 perspectives we might want to think about, basically. Okay. So see if you can just kind of get some ideas, and there's a little bit of a prompt. Coming back each session, nice, yeah, cool. Okay, so players and coaches are infused to attend and enjoy the challenges presented. Great, cool. Really good. Some good answers there. Skill execution improvement, strong intrinsic motivation. Cool. Yeah, really good. Okay. So we're thinking about, right, we're talking about talent as well. So what's particular about talent, what we're trying to achieve in the long term as well. So we can get a few more answers in. Retaining players, yeah. All great answers. These are buzz terms, which is good. Yeah, you're not having to ask coach. Nice, cool. So some nice answers there. Cool. Perfect. Yeah, some healthy perspectives as well, which is good to see. Okay, so 2 kind of perspectives. So we said we're working in talent, right? We're looking at that perspective, okay? So what makes our environment successful? Measures skill possession as well, progression. Cool. Some good answers. So I've ruined up. So perspective 1, okay? So kind of in a talent perspective, in a talent setting, what we're trying to kind of drawn towards a little bit is kind of the performance outcomes perspective generally, but not always. And these are 2 perspectives, and this is not one or the other. Okay, this is not necessarily the one's right. A little bit of conversation, a little bit of debate about things we might want to think about and how we might judge ourselves as successful coaches, particularly in the talent setting. Okay, so I'm thinking, like, if I've done that, am I being successful? If that's what my athletes achieve, have I done that right? Okay, and often we'll see clubs will celebrate, for example, these sorts of things. So talent identification development systems are expected to be effective in converting young athletes, youth athletes, into medal-winning or saleable assets within adult sports. Okay, and sometimes that looks like game results and future medals and transition to elite level and professional contracts. Okay, because they're kind of our markers. They're our markers. It's pretty an isolated kind of explicit example. Okay, so perspective 2, an example, kind of alternative perspective, is we might judge ourselves as successful in talent development environments if we are doing our processes right. We are process driven. Okay, and this is based on this idea. Despite being successful in terms of medal count or producing elite athletes, environments can be highly unsuccessful in terms of safeguarding young people's mental health and broader development. So the idea is behind this is that we're taking a bit more of a broader perspective and essentially saying, if we get our environment the best we can, considering that all these things affect it, okay, we make it the best we can for our athletes in all these different ways. Basically, we optimize our learning environment. Players will go on and achieve what they can themselves. Okay, so if we get our processes right, okay, some might go and get medals, some might be successful, some might play at the elite level in our sport. Okay, some, even though we've done everything we can, we've got all of our processes right, some won't. Okay, and that iceberg, right, the bottom of that iceberg, most players won't. All right, we talk about that pyramid effect, we talk about the pyramid structure, most players just won't. Okay, so if we get our processes right, we make that best environment we can, we've done everything we can to support that process. So it's just a bit more of a kind of a player-centered, holistic perspective of kind of what we might deem ourselves as effective. Okay, so I'm just going to work through now some practical bits of what basically features of kind of effective environments. Okay, so hopefully some takeaway points here. And I'll kind of skip through some of these things and hopefully just draw out the practical bits really. So this is essentially what as research tells us, what the data has told us makes a good environment, okay, from a general perspective. So the first thing is long-term development focus and aims, okay. That might look like avoiding an overemphasis on current results, okay. Not getting tied in and drawn into actually that result that we just had with our players really mattered for the sake of that result, that actually using it as feedback to help development. Treating our young players as young athletes, not mini adults. Okay, I coach 15-year-old boys and I'm 5'8", so they're all up here on me. Embarrassing that is, right? But actually, if you think of kind of holistic development and how players develop psychologically as well, okay, they're all at different stages, so they're not always there. We've got to treat them as young people. And then things like training load, right? So getting that amount of training. And again, thinking kind of across the areas of development. Whilst they might need really high physical challenge if they're at that point in their development, actually how we kind of periodize that with psychological challenge will be really important to think about. And then we can build that into our planning, right? So here's 2 examples, and I'm not gonna, Rampage is one example of kind of providing like a planning structure for long-term development. And Kevin Till, Owen, you can maybe touch on this at the end, but Kev's going to come and do a workshop in a few weeks, I think, with Gaelic, with Dublin Gaelic as well, and talk about Rampage in its entirety as well. But here's a little nod to Rampage as well. And something I like to do with my groups as well, I've tried out this year for the first time actually, is trying to design in kind of a macro, meso, micro session plan, building in my objectives for kind of the whole season. So I did it across a year, and then my meso was across 2 parts of the season, so before Christmas and after Christmas. The micro sessions. What we have is that we don't get drawn into being reactive in our planning in our session. Okay, actually our sessions are tied into our goals for that area for that season long term as well. Okay, which is kind of a useful practical way to work through. And you're going to see it. Oh, he's got Russell's tweet up. Okay, so I don't think Rusty's on the call now. Okay, now it is a shame. It's a shameful thing to do. Okay, I pulled out his tweet and I put it on my page. Okay, but I've done that for a reason. Because I saw this example on Twitter ages ago, and then I was planning this presentation and I thought, what's a good example? And I remembered this, right? I remember this. So it's just an unbelievably good example of kind of like philosophy in action, basically, what that looks like. So just a club putting it out there and saying, this is what we do. This is basically our philosophy. This is our vision on the door, like as you walk to the club, they're really clear. Something like that is a really great practice to do. So coherent messages is kind of the general theme of that area. So looking to kind of defining clear messaging channels. Okay, perhaps explicitly setting that out with parents. Okay, we only use this channel and this channel. Okay, for this type of information, you need to go and find that out by that way. Okay, and then access to role models as well. Okay, so things like providing some sort of crossover periods. So you know that actually at 9:45, the first team are finishing their session, and actually your boys are going to be crossing over and going out to the pitch at that time, and you've got a bit of time where they can kind of see them and work in that space as well. So those crossover periods where they might have space in kind of their clubhouse at the same time to be doing the similar sorts of things, and that shared space then, and then maybe some collective training sessions where we can like offer an opportunity to work across levels. And then emphasizing kind of a collaboration over comparison of our players as well. So as coaches, we're rewarding that social and teamwork. So development, kind of an emphasis of development over early success as well. And because of time, I'm actually, we're going to skip over that Roberto interview. I think we'll have a little look through, but I think we will. But again, strong links to long-term development as well. So we're focusing on, okay, that big picture, what's down there for the future of our athletes. So that means we want to be really in our use of competition. Okay, competition in terms of like directly comparing our athletes in our training groups, and also competition in tournaments versus other groups as well. And like absolutely, and I think feedback is going to be the next presentation as well, but absolutely using that as a feed forward process, using feedback to actually just feed our players with things to work on. Okay, that's what competition really should be in a talent setting. Because until our players get to perform as talented athletes, when they become that level, everything before that is talent development. Everything before when our players go out there and play at one of the highest levels they can, everything before is development towards that. Okay, so there's really got to be an emphasis in the importance of how we use competition in that sense. Okay, so then kind of an individualized aspect to that then. And likely to be a big age factor of this as well. So we've talked about kind of the effects of how people kind of develop at different ages. That might be kind of maturation, for example, on one part. So a big age factor. And as kind of maybe an athlete goes through different stages as well, worth thinking about, so kind of from maybe sampling to investment and specializing and that sort of thing. So it's worth thinking about kind of where we as coaches get that balance between team and individual goals. And actually asking the question, do our athletes know what they should be improving, and how we get kind of that balance between, okay, these are our kind of sessions, these are our objectives for our session, and what our athletes can work on that session individually as well. Okay, so what I've done previously as an example, for example, and it's not necessarily like a prime example, but I had my session objectives, which were team-based, working towards kind of our goals and getting ready for games, but actually using that for development. But asking each player in this session what we're working on individually, what can you identify yourself that you want to work on? And I'm going to ask you during the session how you've done that. Okay, so we've got our team goals, we've got individual goals as well, and kind of creating maybe an individual development plan, okay, and sharing that with other coaches could be a tool for us to help that as well. And that's a point, right? So we've talked about kind of having our different environments. Well, players will have different environments like this. Okay, so we might have school, we might have their county, we might have their club, right? And all of those might be different kind of talent environments in one sense or another. They might feed into our talent development environment. And actually we want some consistency for our players, some coherency across those environments. And again, that's just that nod to basically saying that our athletes develop in different areas, right? So we've got to be kind of constantly aware of that as well a little bit. So the last part of this presentation, we have been quite research focused, right? But hopefully some practical tips to bring out. This is kind of our I Coach Kids research perspective then, and I've got their nice mugshots, everyone who worked on this project as well. So this is kind of research that we did at I Coach Kids to inform some of the practical resources that we make. Okay, and what we did, all right. So we really wanted to make use of the I Coach Kids project, which is kind of across Europe, basically. So we work with all these different partners, and that you see the logos there. What I Coach Kids in itself is all these partners together, and we're really lucky to have such a great network. And that means we can kind of take that Europe things really. I'll get these up here. So I've talked about some of the research so far, and this is our perspective, okay? So basically asking more questions around what do we know and what we don't know. Okay, and I've talked about the role of coaches. Hopefully I'm making that quite clear that we as coaches are really important, and parents as well. Okay, so we wanted to examine and then compare athlete, parent and coach perceptions, taking a macro view of European TDEs, so making use of our kind of networks. And that's for a research reason as well. And we did that because there's actually not much data on parents and coaches. There's really not much out there. And what's out there is really focused on like particular environments. So research showing actually in boys football academies in England, this is what's good and bad, this is strengths and not. There's not much research out there that tells us what are the big general themes going on. So we wanted to find out what the strengths are kind of off over a big area, right? And I think it's nice for me to be able to tell you like that this is the research that informs the work we do at iCoachKids as well. So we're creating a MOOC at the moment, an online training course. We're writing up at the moment, and actually our kind of research is directly informing that, which from a coach perspective is, I think, a really useful thing to know, that actually the resources I'm looking at are informed by research, proper research that was done for the sake of it. And we've got to do a lot more research in the next 2 years to actually like get to that point to build it all together. But that's kind of where we're looking at really. So where are we at? I think we've got the last 10 minutes or so. I'll quickly go through these. So what we did, so we asked athletes, parents and coaches to complete this questionnaire. I'm going to check where we are at times. There we are, 15 minutes. All right. We'll skim through these then. So we asked athletes, parents and coaches from TDEs on different pathways to complete a questionnaire. Okay, so they completed this questionnaire and applied tool on different areas of their talent development environment on these 5 different areas. Okay, and we've got just under 1,500 responses across our athletes, our parents and our coaches. And this was across 5 countries and 27 sports. And to give a bit of a flavour of the athletes, it's kind of 4.5 years in their environment and 12 hours a week of training. So proper talent athletes are on their pathway looking to kind of develop their talent. What did we find out then? So we compared athlete, parent and coaches. Before that, we wanted to look at where they are as strengths. So generally, our data said our data was kind of the environments are generally positive. Okay, so across athletes, parents and coaches were generally positive, but coaches had highest perceptions, followed by athletes and parents lowest. What we found is a bit of a sandwich of athletes in the middle with higher coaches and parents. Okay, and what we found is that long-term development was a real strength of our environments, and support network was the least strength, the lowest relevance. So what that might mean then, and there's a lot we could dig into about this, okay, but these are just a couple of points. So why are coaches high, for example? That's a big question, and those are sorts of questions we want to dig into with a qualitative work coming. But why are coaches thinking that their environment is at this level? Maybe why are parents thinking down at this level? And why are athletes in the middle? And there's some really perhaps realistic understandings of that. Coaches, we have quite a deep understanding of our environment. We're there, we're working with athletes. We know what's going on, so we probably feel like we understand that environment quite well, which is a really good thing. And parents arguably have a kind of more a distant view, right? So they're getting that through the fence, parents looking through the fence of the pitch, okay, and they're getting some of that information secondhand. So it makes sense that maybe they're down there in that perceptions. But what it means that we just got to kind of recognize that actually different stakeholders and different people view their environment differently. And whilst that might seem like we would think that, like the data shows, our evidence suggests that that's a reality, right? So as coaches, when we deliver in our sessions, when we're planning, it's really important that we are open and we have two-way communication with parents and athletes. We speak and meaningfully listen to athletes and parents, because we all might think areas are different. We all might think our talent development is kind of different in different ways. And actually us being open to that, we can learn a lot. And then kind of the final point is that TDEs, and I've talked about the different areas, TDEs are finely balanced beings. And that we want to try and achieve some sort of ecological equilibrium. Okay, we'll call it that. And what I mean by that is if we're not supporting our athletes enough, so for example, with support network, and we're really, really heavy, we're putting a lot of our resources, a lot of our time, a lot of our emphasis on, say, on technical, tactical training, and a bulk of our time goes into that, is that we can't really optimize our talent development environment if we don't provide that balance. Because actually, for example, in a psychological perspective, if we're putting our athletes through like a period of planned kind of psychological process of trying to develop resilience, right? So we're going to say for 3 weeks, we're going to, for a session for a month, we're going to really challenge our athletes and make them work independently and make them try to focus and be resilient towards this particular thing. Well, if we can't provide kind of the emotional support or the support networks to actually concrete those experiences, then we can't optimize that. So it's worth us thinking about what are the knock-on effects of our environment, what are the things that affect that. We'll come back to our model. Okay, if we tweak these different things, if things move around, what affects that and what affects that? Okay, so worth having a think about that. Okay, so we'll start to bring it all together then. So while I'll take through that, while I go through these final points then to summarize, in that chat box, and just a word, a statement, an idea. Okay, what do we get from that? Okay, what is the practical thing that you thought, okay, I'll take that in. What's that look like in my environment? And what can I add in? What's new? Okay, if we could get some ideas in that chat box, that'd be really great. Okay, but as a bit of a summary then, right? So talent development is complex. There's so many things for us to think about, but talent development environment drive our system. They're the most controllable. Okay, they are the most controllable thing we can do as coaches. But let's define and know our successes. What are our markers? Okay, and then use that to judge ourselves. And actually how our athletes, how parents, and how we as coaches perceive our TDE matters. Okay, and actually we might see it slightly differently because we have different perspectives, and those perspectives are really important and of value to those people. Okay. A quick kind of show of kind of the different stuff that we do at I Coach Kids and my Twitter. If you kind of want to chat to me at any point, please email me or DM me or anything like that. I'd love to kind of carry on conversations. But that's kind of everything from me. And Owen, I'll pass you over just to maybe have a few quick questions if we've got time, maybe for questions.
Yeah, will do, Barney. Just if you want to unshare your screen now.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, but like kind of get those final points.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. So folks, what Barney talked about earlier on. So in terms of your own context, so what's the one word, one statement, or one idea that you've thought about what you're going to do in your context? And Eamon's put in coach versus player perceptions of your sessions. Ask for feedback. Brilliant. So if you want to put in stuff like that into the chat box, that's deadly. So Barney, just have just in terms of time, of a little question for myself. So just around your research again, how you're making sense of it yourself, because people, folks on the call. So he talked about the research a little bit, but he didn't talk about how many different sports that is included in the research. So Barney, could you go a little bit more in depth in terms of the different sports, kind of how varied they are, and also the different countries that you're involved with as well with those sports?
Yeah, thanks. Helpful, Owen, because I didn't spend too much time talking about the research, so I can hopefully give a bit more of a context now. So because of the study, kind of we took this big view, it was essentially a matter of sending it out to as many people as we could, and as many sports as we could. So what we got back was responses from 5 countries, and then the countries that are mapped out, and 27 different sports. Actually, our Irish colleagues were very good in providing us some really good networks. So thank you for that. And we've got a really good response back from Gaelic sports and football in Ireland as well. So a lot of the data came from a good portion of the data came from that as well. But it was a really wide range of, and I mean a really wide range of sports. We got all sorts of sports back, but these were all based in talent settings. So there was an inclusion criteria. These athletes kind of were on a pathway, they were playing at a certain standard, that sort of thing. So we're talking about kind of ping pong in Hungary to, football in Ireland, to hockey in England, to wrestling in Lithuania. So we got a real wide range of what talent looks like for these people. And that was quite unique in a sense. We're able to kind of get that really big picture.
And just in terms of the talent that Barney's talking about in terms of the GA context, so was there in the academy squads in the counties, and for football and hurling, as well as ladies football and camogie was involved in that also. Just in terms of that, so in my context, I'm in terms of the F10 model, I'm an under 6 coach and an adult coach. in terms of the talent model that you were seeing, how experienced were the coaches within the talent environments that that you got feedback from?
So how experienced? So a little bit tricky, a little bit tricky to answer, but
generally,
I'd have to look at the data really, to be honest, Owen. But it kind of really varied. Yeah. Is there kind of anything particularly kind of interesting in that sense? Like, what are the kind of thinking?
Yeah. So probably kind of going back to, as you talked about earlier on, in terms of the performance outcome, the process outcome.
Yeah.
Was there any, and again, not mentioning which sports they were, but was there certain sports that were more process driven rather than performance driven, and vice versa?
Again, super hard to answer. Okay, because we haven't looked at, we weren't able to look at the comparison of countries or sports. Well, we are able to do countries, but we've got to think that kind of some sports were really high samples. So it's actually really difficult to kind of compare some of them where we've only got like small samples in certain sports. Okay, so that's where like some of the research that looked at particular TDEs actually is quite useful for us to look at, because we can kind of like draw more firmer conclusions like particular sports or particular contexts. Well, we were kind of looking to take this broad view. That makes sense.
And again,
I can't answer.
I know. I'm trying to get more. I'm trying to get more in that in terms of what. And then, kind of just one more, Barney, in terms of your own context is having obviously your experience of hockey and cricket. So which is your favorite sport? I kind of know the answer to this anyway. But which is your favorite sport, and is there a reason for it? Is it because of the environment of the club? Is it because of a coach? Is it because of your environment when you're a player?
Now, that's a good question as well. That's a good question. And I think it's really hard to answer. And it makes me think that actually certain sports in certain countries, we really do have our own cultural differences. That's a huge factor. And like the things I've talked about today, those generic principles, like has absolutely got to be underlaid with the fact that culture is a massive thing. So like hockey is like in my heart. I absolutely love hockey, but one thing we struggle with in hockey is sometimes the comparative culture compared to cricket. Sometimes, the engagement in kind of like day-to-day running of like people being involved in clubhouses and that real social interaction between people is not always there at hockey as much. So I kind of wish we had that in a hockey sense, but hockey is my heart. But also I wish there was, both sports struggle with sometimes connection between the like different parts of their systems, and in hockey we struggle with like I was saying, that my county group that I coach, they don't see any other county groups. They don't interact with them. So isolated, and that's because we kind of struggle with the being bound by some facility things and that geographical element of that as well, which is quite difficult. But I do wish that there was more of the like their interaction between people at clubs at hockey. Yeah.
Top class.
I had one question there for you.
Go ahead.
So I think when you're talking about like talented athletes, like the people that you're talking about in these sense, they're like kind of the ones that would stand out in a training session, and they can often kind of be they're only known as the athlete. Like it's that's Laura who's good at football, that's Barnaby who's good at hockey. How do you do you have any methods kind of for getting to know the player outside of the sport, like beyond just their talent? How do you connect with the player kind of without making it about the sport,
Yeah, good question. I think there's definitely a part of and challenge of like us identifying particular players as being like the good ones and like the talented ones, and there's a whole range of things. Like at that point they're just showing some sort of more some more basically overt things that make them better, but actually they're miles away possibly from being at a point where they need to show their development, and actually in 2 years time they might be at the bottom of the pile. I think that's we've got to be really open to how we see talented players and what we mean, and putting that badge on them. But it's a good question. I think and the one thing I was preparing this presentation, I knew I'm focusing on talent, right? I'm focusing on talent. But the more I was thinking about it is a lot of talent development is just good coaching. Like there's so many things that we talk about in talent development that are like, you know, these complex physiological things that affect talent. And that's where the conversation goes. Actually, in these environments, we just want to do good coaching, and the presentations today have given that information. Like being a good coach, getting to know your athletes is still the absolute pinnacle of what we need to do. And there's such a wide range of things that we know that affects athletes, right? Yeah, we can't control those. We can control getting to know our athletes, providing good experience to them in their environments. You know, not pin marking them as talented is a strategy that we might want to do, but obviously, you know, we want to provide them that differentiation of challenging them when they need it as well. But getting to know them, you know, parents are often a missed opportunity to like know our athletes as well. They're their parents, they know them better than anyone in that world. So let's use them positively. You know, we've got to value parents as probably the biggest asset in talent development that we can. Like they have the knowledge on their children. So let's harness that. Let's have that open communication and be really receptible to using parents positively, and send that message to parents that we're open. We want to try and like engage you in our processes, like invite them to sessions, like speak to them at the gate when they come into their sessions, like academy and parents, get their parents in there, speak to them, like get them in, show them what it means to be like the talent settings as well, because that's quite challenging sometimes.
I can't agree enough on that, Barney, in terms of using the parents, and they're the biggest resource, as you said. They know the children well, so engaging with them, even in terms of having parent engagement workshops, we would have done that. And I know that that's something that's come out in your research a little bit. When the parents are more involved and feel a part of that environment, it's beneficial not only to the person and the athlete, but especially the coach as well, because you know they're creating that, you know, improving that environment for that player, for that child. Plus, they're increasing their own kind of benefit for them as being able to communicate with the parents in a different way rather than the players, rather than their own coaches. So it's that community aspect as well that is very much prevalent, obviously, in the GAA being a community organisation, but you know, increasing that community element is so important.
Yeah, definitely. I know, and I've talked about having kind of like a holistic perspective to development. Well, for doing that, like, there's a lot of stuff for us to pay attention to in that sense. And like, you know, what's the chances from the sessions in our talent development environment that we're getting with our athletes? We can get a sound idea of how they're developing physically, where they are socially, where they are cognitively, where they are emotionally, where they are technically. Like, how can we do that when we see them for, I don't know, you know, 5, 10, 15 hours a week? How can we do that? You know, like, but their parents see them all the time. You know, they are such a good source of information to what's going on in their lives, basically, and we can use that really positively.
Just to kind of finish off, Whitman and Jared to join us. As Barnaby talked about, the iCoach Kids links and all of the resources that we have with iCoach Kids in terms of the new website, the podcast, the YouTube channel, the MOOCs, especially MOOC 1, 2, and 3 is on the YouTube channel. The MOOCs stand for Massive Open Online Course, and they're free. And again, as Barnaby said, he's working on the next MOOC, which is 13 to 18s in terms of iCoach Kids Plus. Kevin Till, he touched on Kevin as well. So Professor Kevin Till, who's over the Doc Prof at Leeds Beckett that I'm undertaking as well. And Kevin is going to go more in depth in his Rampage framework on the 22nd of February in terms of our webinar series. So Barney kind of just teed that up very, very nicely. So thanks for that, Barney. And last thing in terms of kind of a little takeaway kind of from my own notes, what Barney has kind of done today is give his own perspective, give the research behind it, and then tied it all together in terms of how it would work and what it looks like. So that three-pronged approach, as you would have seen in the sandwich. So Barney's done that with his own presentation today. So Barney, thanks very much.